Welcome to the Productivity Show, a podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today, I'm joined by a good friend and comrade, as I like to call him, Nick Gray. Nick is the author of The 2-Hour Cocktail Party, a step-by-step handbook that teaches you how to build big relationships by hosting small gatherings. Over 75,000 people have watched this TEDx talk about why he hates most museum tours and how he reinvented the museum tour industry by starting the company Museum Hacks, which he later exited with great success. Nick has been featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and New York Magazine called him a host of culturally significant parties. He has hosted hundreds of cocktail parties all over the world, and today we're going to be talking about his framework for hosting your first party, how to invite people, and how to make sure that people show up so you never have an empty party. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks, I'm happy to be here.
I'm super excited to have you here, but before we start diving into your framework, how you host parties, and your story, would you mind sharing with the audience your top 3 favorite resources as of lately?
Yes, I was thinking about this. First, the news. I'll tell you where I consume my news. So I like to read Bloomberg News. I've bought a subscription for it. And I get, as part of that, they mail me a weekly Bloomberg Business Week physical magazine. And that feels old-fashioned, but I like it because it's this physical artifact that sits around my house of the news. And I enjoy reading that sometimes before bed. So I like that. There's a newsletter that I read every week called Recommendo. And Recommendo lists gadgets and weird websites and little corners of the internet. So I really enjoy the stuff that they find. I found out about a robot vacuum through that newsletter that I really like called the Roborock. And what's fascinating about it is they use LiDAR to map your house. So not just like the dumb iRobot vacuum things where it just bounces around. I feel like the AI in this vacuum is the absolute best. And I've owned a lot of the best ones, and I really like this one. So I like that one. And then the last thing, I would say that I like to read product reviews. And the only place I trust was Wirecutter. But a friend recently told me about a site called rtings.com, R-T-I-N-G-S. And he said that that's one of the only places that he actually thinks is legitimate good reviews on electronics and things like that.
Also, we'll make sure to link everything in the show notes.
Nice.
So, Nick, we met a few months ago. I would say probably 8-10 months ago, over a year, about a year now.
Yeah.
And you've been hosting a lot of cocktail parties around Austin, and I've been to many of them and met some great people. And when I first heard about you, when you first moved here too, I heard about how Nick Gray is a great host and you have to go to one of his events. And so having been to your events and, having seen the experience, and now that we're doing this podcast together, I was doing my research and I was trying to figure out, where did this come from? Has Nick always been this great host or... and then I found this article about you, and it was actually quoting your mom, and she said, Nick has always been inviting people because our basement was always a gathering place.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
That's so funny that you found that. Yeah, when I was so I went to high school in North Georgia, and I moved there the latter part of my 9th grade, so freshman in high school. And I didn't know a lot of people. I think it's a hard time to move in high school. For you, did you go to the same high school through all 4 years?
Yeah, so the high school in the Netherlands is 6 years. Oh, wow. So I was there the whole time. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe you can imagine switching schools as a freshman. I didn't drive. I didn't really know anybody. I was a little young, pretty awkward. And it did happen that my parents, maybe that idea of hosting was very generous and built into them, because we always had a refrigerator downstairs filled with sodas and some bags of snacks that they would buy at the grocery store. Not expensive stuff, right? They'd just buy a 12-pack of Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, stuff like that. I loved Mountain Dew when I was in high school. I was always a caffeine addict. And yeah, so they would make that available and my friends could come over. It wasn't a particularly nice basement. It wasn't even finished, this one room. It was half finished. And we would play pool and my friends would drink all their sodas and eat all the snacks. And maybe that's where the idea of like seeing the benefits of hosting was something that I found. That could be.
So did you just invite people and say, hey, I have Mountain Dew at home, like come hang out, or what was the deal?
I don't know exactly. I remember that we bought a miniature-sized pool table. So it wasn't like a huge pool table. It was like small and manageable. Not to say that a large one isn't, but it was just very accessible for a bunch of high school kids to sort of goof around on. And I don't know how it actually started, but I was definitely not a popular kid in high school. I didn't hang out. I didn't play sports. That was big. In America, if you play sports, then you're generally a popular. But I was really big on the computer. Maybe I would host LAN parties too. I hosted LAN parties for some of my friends to play games like Wolf 3D and Doom and stuff like that.
So would you say that you were like a social person back then? Because if people meet you nowadays, they think, oh, Nick, he's extroverted. Like he knows a ton of people.
Right.
He's definitely extroverted. Like, would you consider yourself extroverted back then?
I don't think I was shy, but I didn't feel popular, that's for sure. But I wouldn't feel so extroverted. I wasn't super confident, but I also wasn't shy necessarily. It's hard for me to say now, and it's one of those things where looking back, it's probably very easy to, in hindsight, say, oh yes, of course, you were this, that, or the other. But I can tell you that in high school, I didn't feel like I was extroverted or like I had a ton of friends or anything like that.
So from doing some digging around, I saw that you started like a company when you were in high school, like a web hosting company.
Yep.
And you were involved with your family's business, which was like creating and selling electronic devices for planes.
Yep.
And did you spend any time being social during that time, or were you just so busy running businesses and helping your family business?
Like anybody in college or in university, I definitely had my social time. I was a member of a campus comedy troupe at the school that I went to. And that was just exhilarating and probably helped me in more ways than I can imagine to perform in front of an audience and to think about lines or maybe how to be funny or comedic timing or something. I'm by no means funny or hilarious. I've never done have you ever done stand-up before?
No.
People that do that are crazy. I cannot imagine doing stand-up comedy. A friend of mine, Michael, did stand-up. And he was not somebody that is extremely social, but he said that after he did stand-up, business meetings were so much easier to make a business presentation. Once you do stand-up, which is like the hardest thing ever, he said doing a business presentation is a walk in the park. It's so easy. And he could make the littlest joke in a work meeting, and everybody would think it's hilarious. Versus you go to stand-up comedy, right? And everybody's like, you better make me laugh. But at work, now that he has those skills, it completely unlocked for him this like killer function thing. Still, I would never do it. It seems terrifying. It seems absolutely terrifying.
Okay, so you've never done stand-up, but you're pretty good at like controlling a room, I find.
Yeah.
Like how did that then come about?
I think just through hosting, through so much experience hosting my events. And now I'm on a mission to try to teach people how to do that and to learn how to be a facilitator. Through my last business, Museum Hack, leading these museum tours, you really have to get people like to follow you and to like really be on your team to do the type of tours that I would do, which were very fast-paced, very, very active, very non-traditional, very, for some people, uncomfortable, right? Because we're doing things in a museum that you're not supposed to do.
So it sounds like by doing all these tours, you kind of had your reps of like getting people's attention and like making the whole tour fun and like making sure everyone has a good time and like there was something riding on it too in a way because you're making money from it, so you had to make sure that everyone was feeling good about the tour and was happy. And how I remember watching your TED Talk because you were talking about how you went on a date that kind of went on this path of you starting Museum Hacks. Would you mind sharing that story?
Yeah. I started Museum Hack after I went on a romantic date. A woman brought me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which many of your listeners have probably been to. It's the most popular museum in all of America. It gets millions of visitors each year. And it's like America's equivalent of the Louvre, right? It's in New York City. It's enormous. It's 13 acres of Central Park, 2.3 million square feet. There's over 200,000 objects on display. And for most New Yorkers, at least when I started to go there 10 years ago, or 13 years ago now, the Met was just like this tour. It's like Times Square. Like you didn't really go there except if your parents were in town. And it's not a place people would go hang out at. But this woman brought me there. It was like our third date. And she started to show me things like Egyptian artifacts or sculpture or just furniture even, just like these random stuff. And I think she talked to me at my level, which is like a third grade reading level. And that helped me to not feel intimidated by the space and to go slow and to not try to do this narrative arc of like, well, this is Baroque and this matters because this artist, just being like, what do you think about that chair? Is that cool? I'm like, yeah, that's really cool. She'd be like, well, that was owned by the king of such and such and it's part of this. And I would be like, oh, that's really neat. Saying, I don't know if it was her, but as I started to learn about the museum, like being able to know that I didn't like certain pieces of art and being able to say the stuff that I didn't like, that became a very big thing for me that was sort of powerful. But yeah, she brought me on this tour and I fell in love with the museum. I just said, I think I moved to a big city like New York for stuff like this. Similar to here, we're in Austin. I love to go down to the creek, right? Barton Springs, Barton Creek. I love to go there. That's like the thing in Austin for me. For me, the Met became my thing. And I started going there every single weekend just for fun. It became like my third place away from home. And then through a series of events, I started to give tours for my friends. And then I built a very large business around giving those live museum tours.
Yeah. And I think what's fascinating too, and very impressive for me at least, was you went to school as a business major. So you never had any sort of art classes in your curriculum at all.
Right. I never took an art history class. I still haven't taken one. And I created like the largest museum. Right.
So it really shows you, hey, if you're inspired by something, you're really motivated and something you're very passionate about, which sounds like you were, you can pretty much pull off anything.
Yeah. And I think I also didn't have the baggage of how things were supposed to be done. And that helped bring a fresh perspective that was really appreciated.
So when you moved to New York City, which I believe was like a few years after college, right? Mm-hmm. Did you know anybody or what inspired that move?
I did know some people. Some kids that I went to college with had moved there and they were very successful. And I wanted to go there because I wanted to live in a big city. And I love big cities. For me, being in a city is really nice. I don't have kids yet. I was younger then. I didn't like driving my car. I liked being around a lot of activity. And so I wanted to move to a big city. And yeah, I had friends there. So I don't want to say that this is a story of, I literally didn't know a single person and I pulled myself up. I had friends there, but I made the decision to host parties because I didn't want to live in their shadow. I wanted to create my own group and not always be a hanger-on to their success. And so I very distinctly said, I'm going to create my own group. I don't just want to always go to their stuff. And that's kind of why I started to host my events.
So what makes for a great event? Like when you started off, like did you follow a playbook somewhere? Did you read something? Like how did you figure out this whole thing that you have going on today?
The thing I have today has evolved through a long time, but the very first event I hosted was for my birthday, and it was a tea party where I drank Darjeeling tea that I had brought back from a trip, and I just opened it up. I used it as an excuse to meet on a Saturday afternoon and to make tea for all my friends. And I didn't drink alcohol at the time, and so I felt that was something that seemed nice and authentic for me, and that's frankly what I wanted to do. That's a whole other story that I believe on your birthday, it's the one day that you get to do what you want to do, and your friends kind of have to play along. So that day on my birthday, I hosted it. What for me makes a good event? I think I thrive with some structure and knowing the rules and like the boundaries. So now you see that in a lot of my events. There's a lot of structure.
Well, because when you go to most, quote unquote, let's say networking events, there usually is no structure, which I find kind of challenging because you're kind of relying on just bumping into the right person or having some sort of conversation starter that you hope will go well, and whether it's talking about the weather or something that just happened in town. So compare like a typical networking event that you go to versus what you do and how it's different.
So a normal networking event to many people feels largely transactional. And I think it's why networking has gotten a bad rap, that it feels like everybody's trying to get something out of you, or it's very superficial. I've been to some too. I think we all have. And it's just, it just feels kind of gross a little bit. At those events, at most events that you go to, this isn't just networking events, but you're left up to meeting the type of people that you happen to physically bump into. And this has even happened at $10,000 conferences I've gone to, where there won't be any structure. They want to be the chill host, like what Priya Parker speaks about in The Art of Gathering. They want to be the chill host where, I don't want to impose structure. I want to let my friends just figure it out. And I want to be chill. I want to be chill. And I remember I went to a very expensive event and we're getting up in line to go get lunch. And I realized at that moment, I will be dependent. Where I sit at lunch is only based on who I get in line next to by random. So I need to be very, very careful. I realized in line, I said, wow, if I don't change something, I'm going to be sitting down with this individual I'm talking to. There's very little way for sort of polite conversation to say, well, it was very nice speaking with you in line now. I'll go sit with somebody else now. And so at my events, I feel like I'm rambling a little, but at my events, there's a lot of opportunities to start and to end conversations. And that is something that I think is really important.
So before we start diving in, one of the things that you and I have talked about briefly, I think it was at your last event, you mentioned how post-COVID or even the last 3 years, like most people haven't made a new friend. And one thing I hear a lot from hosting too is it's become very difficult post-college to make friends.
Yes.
And once you're in your 30s or 40s, it's kind of like an attrition game. Like if you have a group of friends, you just hope they're with you until you die. And if someone, moves or is not in your life for whatever reason, you just, you're out of luck. There's nobody else coming in, right? But you kind of took a different take on that.
That is right. I read a fact that before COVID even, that most American adults hadn't made a new friend in 3 years. And that it is I don't know if it's a loneliness, but what you said about it being a game of attrition almost with your friends, it is very hard to add people to a social circle, to a group, right? Especially as you get older. And I wrote this book to hope that, and to really encourage people that you can make new friends, and that it is messed up that nobody teaches adults how to make new friends. And many people, as they get older, they make friends through their children's school. And that can be a way that people start to make friends, is through like their kids' school groups and things like that. But for many people, it's almost this like forgotten area of out of college, and yet, the kids are a little too young or something. There's this like 15-year period where you really don't make new friends. And then even when your kids go to school, things get so busy and it's so hard that you don't make true friendships anymore. So that's something I'm really helping folks to make. And just one thing I want to say about that. Think about if you're an adult now and you meet somebody interesting. What is the next step to make and create that friendship? You need to ask for their contact info, and then you need to pretty much invite them to a one-on-one event. And that is a big lift for a lot of people. To go from bumping into somebody interesting at a soccer game, social event, even in the grocery store, to having a one-on-one with them takes enormous amounts of scheduling and effort and confidence on both sides of the equation. And I think that hosting a small, lightweight gathering is such an easy way to turbocharge this network of acquaintances and loose connections, which we can talk about that if you're interested. The idea that we find out about most great opportunities in life through our weak ties or our loose connections. It's not our best friends that are telling us about new jobs, new businesses, new romantic partners. It's through these friends of friends and stuff.
Yeah, I remember first learning about the idea of weak ties maybe like a decade ago. And it's just the idea that if you put like a social graph together, most opportunities, whether it's business, jobs, right, even romantic relationships, are probably not through like your best friends or your core group, but it's like their friends or their friends of friends.
Yes.
That's how you ended up in your next job or whatever the person you're dating right now or married to even.
Right.
And so the bigger that pool, the bigger the opportunity you essentially pull, right? And going back to what you were saying earlier, one of the feedbacks I've heard, and this is especially true post-COVID, but even before COVID was true, was as we have gone more remote, it's become even harder to make friends because at least if you're working in an office, you have built-in friends because of your coworkers, right? You go for happy hours or something, or you have a company events, and you tend to meet people that way. But once you're remote and your team members are in different countries or different cities, good luck. You have no friends.
Right. It really is. Remote has done no favors for friendships, right?
And when you have social media on top of that, like you might be quote unquote online friends, but are you really that type of friend that you would call if you're in an emergency? Probably not.
You and I both live a lot of our lives online through stories and things like that. Do you have the same thing happen where you'll see people that you haven't seen in forever, and you're like, dude, I haven't seen you in forever, and they know everything about you and everything of what's going on in your life? At least this happens to me. I bet it does to you. They know everything. They're like, Dan, how was your trip to Warsaw? How was your thing? And you're like, bro, what is going on in your life? How do you know all about my life? I haven't seen you in a year and a half. So there's an interesting balance that I'm not sure if that's the idea that you're getting at, that social can make us feel like we keep in touch when in reality we're not truly in touch.
Yeah. I actually went on a date recently, and what's funny was she listened to the podcast, and she's been listening for like 3 or 4 years or something. So she knew everything about me, but I knew nothing about her.
Right.
It was a little crazy to be in that position. But there's like very few people who really understand that, and that's very unique. But going back to your party, so you have a framework in your book, right? The 2-hour cocktail party, how to build big relationships with small gatherings, and I think you kind of like informally call it the Nick framework.
Right.
Can you explain that?
So my goal is to try to really to convince somebody to host a gathering. And it's probably, and something I had mentioned to you that I'm struggling with, is trying to get new people to host, to teach somebody that anybody can learn how to host a party. And my formula, this Nick method, as a just high-level overview. So my name is Nick, spelled N-I-C-K. So N stands for name tags. I think you got to have name tags. They're so important. I could talk for an hour about why I feel strongly. I stands for icebreakers. At my parties, I do 3 quick rounds of icebreakers, maybe 2, but 2 or 3 rounds of icebreakers. An example of an icebreaker could be, say your name, say what you do for work, and what's one of your favorite things to eat for breakfast. So that's I. C stands for cocktails. So cocktails only. Not drinks, not dinner, not like a full buffet. Don't have everybody bring a dish like a potluck. Cocktails only. And then the K stands for kick them out at the end. My parties are only 2 hours. I don't want them to like linger on. And so when the time is over, I usually finish the party up right around that time.
So let's start with the C, the cocktail part. So someone might read this book cover and say, well, I don't drink, or, I don't like cocktails. I'm more of a beer guy. Like, what would you tell that person then?
I would tell them that I support you, that I don't drink alcohol either. There's not a single drink recipe in the book. But the phrase cocktail party exhibits and represents the social idea of a casual event that's meant to meet people. A cocktail party, when you say it immediately, people have the idea that it is a lot of lightweight, easy conversations, and it's an event potentially that they can pop into, and they can arrive late and they can show up at whatever time, and it's not a big stress if how they dress or anything like that. So I use the phrase cocktail party to encompass this easy mental model of a lightweight social event. And it doesn't have to be about drinks. If you don't want to serve alcohol, you don't have to. One thing I will note about the book is I actually suggest guests not to have beer, because are you a beer drinker?
No, not a big beer drinker.
I don't say beer because maybe you know some beer drinkers, but beer drinkers are often highly brand loyal, and they're incredibly picky. some of them can be incredibly specific about what types of beer that they will drink. Beer is also messy. Beer is often served in single-serving bottles and cans and stuff, and it's a lot harder for me to serve. And so I've just kind of stopped serving beer. You can definitely host a party, and you can have beer, and it's very manageable. But I can tell you that I've hosted hundreds of parties, and I don't serve beer, and I really haven't had any problems.
Yeah, I like the word cocktail because, it kind of implies a little bit of an upscale gathering, right? If you say, hey, I'm hosting a small gathering, it doesn't have quite the same energy versus like a cocktail party, which could be kind of fancy. It could be like, oh, there's going to be some cool people there versus like, hey, I'm hosting a small gathering. That could be a bunch of nerds, and I identify myself as a nerd, so don't get me wrong. But yeah, I think the word cocktail has that powerful energy that's a little bit more exciting than, I don't know, other words that I can think of.
What do you think of the phrase? Because I went back and forth on this a lot on whether I should use that phrase cocktail party. What do you think of happy hour?
So happy hour, I like, yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, what that means is it's after work.
Yeah.
It's pretty quick and easy.
Right.
Pretty low commitment too, whether you show up or not.
Right.
So if you said, hey, this is the 2-hour happy hour party.
Yeah.
Or the 2-hour happy hour, I'd be like, oh yeah, I would get that.
Yeah. Right. So I often wonder if I should have used that. You said something though that the phrase cocktail party is slightly upscale and seems slightly more exciting than a happy hour. A happy hour, in my experience, typically lends itself to an event not hosted at the home.
That's true, yeah. And one of the things you mentioned in the book is, where you should host.
Yes.
And for most people, I'm going to guess they think, oh, if I'm going to host a gathering, maybe I'll do it at a bar or at a restaurant. But you actually tell people to gather at home.
Yes.
Why is that?
I'm really specific about, for 95% or more of all the people listening to this, hosting at home is the best solution, even if they think it might not be. I believe hosting at home is the best for the following reasons. One, it's very generous. When you host at home, there's no totaling up the tab at the end of the night. They don't have to go interact with a bartender to buy things. They don't have to swipe their credit card. You are the one that is hosting, and you are the one that's giving value to those that are showing up and arriving. It is not very generous, the more that I think about it, to invite someone to a happy hour. That's not generous. They have to buy their own drinks. Okay, it's nice that you're doing the organizing. But at a cocktail party, you're hosting. You have bought the booze, you have some snacks, whatever, and you are giving the gift of an invitation. When you host that at your home, it truly feels like a generous thing to do. The next reason to host at home is that you can control the environment and the space in a way that you can't at a bar or at a restaurant. At a bar, a lot of people host like their birthday party at a bar. I lovingly call those bardies. And I feel like a little part of me dies inside whenever I get invited to one of those because it's such a missed opportunity. Birthday parties at bars, they're loud, they're crowded, they're not special. You don't know who's with the birthday party, who's not. You're bumping into people. There's not a lot of new conversations that are made. You're just kind of there for the host. A final reason to host at home is that it really allows you to turbo skip the levels of relationship to create these new connections with people. When you invite someone into your home, we were talking about this, it's such a vulnerable act to let somebody and to bring somebody into your home. You're really sharing space with them. And as we talk about building big relationships, when you host at home, you truly do get to show them a piece of you. It's the one way that I know to truly turbocharge the speed at which a relationship can go deep.
So when you first started hosting, I remember you lived in Brooklyn at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So did you have a big space? Was it small, big? Like, I'm sure people have concerns about, what if my place isn't that nice, or it's maybe not the nice part of town, or isn't that cozy, or whatever. I don't have a lot of seating. Like, what makes for a good space?
When I first moved to Brooklyn, I had two other roommates. We lived in not necessarily a nice part of Brooklyn. The basement smelled like cat litter and a little bit gross, to be honest. But it was a space. There was like a kitchen down there. My roommate had his band equipment, but I could host in the kitchen, and that's where I invited people. And the size is the biggest concern that I hear from people why they shouldn't host at home. And I've tested this extensively. This one kid recently, his name is Noah, and he lives in Chicago. And I wrote an article on my site about it. He has a 400 square foot apartment in Chicago. And he did as a test to see how many people. He hosted 29 people inside his apartment. And granted, he said that was about 9 too many. But he said it still worked. Everything was great. People loved it. It was loud, but yeah, it was fine. Hosting at home when you have a small house or a small apartment actually works really well because it creates the energy. And that noise, while it can be a little annoying, it actually creates all this energy. And when you have that, it's easier for you as a host. You have to do less hosting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of the bigger the group, the easier it is to host.
Right. Which you know as a dinner host that when you have a dinner, you are on. Like you are performing. Like you are managing that 2 or 3 hour block. As a cocktail, you get to like come in and out of host mode when you have the right number of people, which I think is 15 to 20.
Okay, so we talked about the C, cocktail. Let's talk about the N.
The N for name tags.
Name tags. So one signature thing about your events is whether you see the photos, you hear about it, is everyone has name tags. Why are you so insistent on having name? Like even when we went to your book launch, we were on Warren Springs. We're on the water. Everyone is on the paddleboard, and still everybody had a name tag.
I did waterproof name tags, which I've never done before. I had lanyards and everything. It was great. I think name tags are important to create the safe space, visual safe space, that everyone is there to meet new people and that there's no cliques at that party. I have often been an outsider going into events, and I always think like, do they all know each other? Is this some sort of a clique? Am I just the new person here? When you have name tags, it really frees everybody up to go up and say hello and to make new introductions. Your listeners are probably thinking, they're like, oh, I'm inviting my neighbors and my friends. I'm going to have name tags. It sounds so formal. Just try it. It's the one thing I feel so strongly about. People love it because name tags serve as a visual representation that everybody's on the same team. It's like a jersey when you're playing sports. Everybody's on the same team. And this time, the team that they're on is one that's willing to meet new friends and say hello to new people. Name tags also help for those new people that you're going to bring into your circle. Imagine you meet a cool barista or somebody at the grocery store or somebody that you met at another event, and you want to invite them in. Well, they don't know any of your friends. They hardly know you. But when you say that there's going to be name tags, you let them know that, like, okay, not everybody knows each other. I hear that a lot from people. Who do you invite to your parties? And I usually say, well, it's a mix of half people I know and half new friends that I think are interesting. So I think name tags are also helpful for that. I also think a lot about the people that bring a guest to an event. And when you bring a guest to an event, maybe a significant other or maybe you're on a date, having name tags makes it so much more accessible for them. They don't know anybody's name. And now it just removes one thing that you have to try to memorize. I think also I'm terrible at names. I'm absolutely terrible. I have a real hard time with names. But when there's the name tags, you don't have to memorize that. You can not stress about, oh God, did I forget this person's name? All these awkward scenarios and situations where you've had an hour-long conversation and now you forget somebody's name and you're too embarrassed to ask them for it.
I think there's one really subtle thing to name tags too that you kind of mentioned there, which is it kind of creates this jersey or uniform aspect of the crowd.
Yes.
Meaning, like, even if you're a billionaire and you're hanging out with a bunch of people who are not billionaires, like, by having a name tag, it creates this uniform, like, crowd.
Someone told me that there's a photo of Brad Pitt at an Oscars after party wearing a name tag. And that, for me, I have to find that so we could, but, like, yeah, even the top of the top have to wear a name tag. And that's something I talk about in the book. You have to do it with 100%. You can't let one or two people not wear it because then the whole system falls apart. But when you make everybody do it, it is like, I think, is that where you're getting at? It's like leveling the playing field almost.
Who are like maybe some high level people or like people of big stature that you've personally sign their name on?
To sign their name tag? I don't want to say any specific names, but I do have a story where I invited a very successful business person to one of my parties, and I really worried about breaking them up to do the round of icebreakers. Would they think it was corny? Would they think it's cheesy? That act of stopping a party to do an activity can be very intimidating. And they were deep in conversation, or it looked like they were. And I was like, oh, maybe I should wait till they're done. But I said, no, hey, I'm going to stop this. And so I did my little thing to stop and to call the room to attention. And we did the icebreaker. And everything was great. They loved it. I got such positive feedback afterwards. And in my head, I was like, I have to make an exception for this person. I have to follow their lead at my own party, which is so silly, right? A lot of my book talks about and hopefully gives people the empowerment to be a leader at their own event. Because I think that's what's wrong with a lot of parties. Nobody truly steps up as the host. They don't really take an active role in being a host. And that's something I'm interested in.
Okay, so we talked about the C, we talked about the N. Let's talk about the I, speaking of icebreakers. So what is an icebreaker?
An icebreaker is an opportunity for everybody to signal or share about themselves at a party. I use icebreakers just because what I was talking about. Oftentimes you go to an event and you don't know who's there, right? You're like, okay, I guess I'm just going to leave it up to the host to make introductions, which most people don't do, or to who I physically bump into, and then I ask them that age-old question, oh, so what do you do? So I started using icebreakers at all my events because it allows me and allows my guests to do a little bit of a visual survey of showing who's attending and maybe who you might want to speak to. Now, this isn't to say that you only want to speak to people that are business and important and rich and successful. No, maybe you're into a new hobby. You're playing volleyball, or maybe you want to travel to South America. You get the opportunity to express and to share those types of things. So for me, the icebreakers create new conversations amongst your guests.
So when you do an icebreaker, I've noticed that, you ask people like, hey, what's your name? Mm-hmm. Maybe what do you do for work? Mm-hmm. And then the third part is usually the icebreaker itself.
Yeah.
Right. And in the beginning, I'm going to guess you probably want to use a simple question.
Yeah.
So what's like a typical icebreaker you ask people?
So I think about icebreakers like green, yellow, red. A green is the easiest icebreaker that you start when nobody has any rapport that's built up. A green level icebreaker would be, what's one of your favorite things to eat for breakfast? It's an easy question to answer. There's no judgment. And pretty much everybody decides to eat or not to eat if they're doing intermittent fasting, breakfast each day. And it's easy for them to think about and remember, and they're not going to be judged too hard. It also, though, does express a little bit of your personality. If somebody says that they eat, blueberries with acai, then maybe you'd ask them about a healthy fruit-based. If somebody says that they eat pancakes drizzled in, such and such, well, maybe talk to them about delicious desserts or something. So the icebreaker does allow you to share a bit of your personality. A yellow icebreaker, which requires a little bit more vulnerability once the group is warmed up, one that I like to use is similar to what you asked me at the beginning. What is a great piece of media that you've consumed recently? That can be a podcast, a Netflix show, a movie, a documentary, a tweet, a long-form article. Just what's a good piece of media that you've read, a great book even. One note is that I'm not asking people what's your favorite book. Your favorite book, that is a definitive, subjective, what is my one favorite book? That's very hard. For me, that would not be a good icebreaker because people are going to judge me. I have to decide what is my one favorite book. But a way to change it would be what is one of your favorite books, or what's a book you've read recently. That makes it easier. And so I'm looking for these icebreakers that are short, succinct, and then as the night goes on, that people feel like they can add value by listening to everybody sharing.
So what is a red?
A red level icebreaker would be like, what's one of the worst first dates that you've ever been on? A red level icebreaker requires a lot of vulnerability, right? What's the worst relationship you've ever had? What's the best relationship you've ever had? What are you most proud of that you've ever done in your life? Stuff like that. Things that really require vulnerability and trust and openness and a group that is willing to go there. And I hear from a lot of people who host dinners, for example, that they will ask right at the beginning, like, what's your ask, right? Like, what are you here for? Like, what can we do for you? And they'll do that before rapport has kind of been created and established, in my opinion. And so I really scaffold or stagger or build up to my level of icebreakers. And almost every single party that I've hosted, I start with the breakfast icebreaker. I don't even care what the answers are. It just lets people get talking and sharing. And that, for me, just like warms up the space.
I remember reading your book about icebreakers, and one lady said, when you asked, what's your favorite thing for breakfast? And she said, cigarette.
Yes. She said cigarettes. She was this grizzled New Yorker. She's like a fashion writer or something. She's like, my name's Janine. I'm from New York. And my favorite thing for breakfast is cigarettes. And everybody is hilarious.
Well, like you said, it immediately showed like a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And anybody, if you're a smoker, you would go, oh, I want to talk to that person. Right? Just like if somebody said, oh, I eat acai for breakfast, like you're like, oh, if you're that type of person who's really healthy or like you're into that sort of stuff, you go, oh, I want to talk to that person, right? So when I've been to your events and then we go through these icebreakers, you kind of see like, oh, this person said that, this person said this.
Yes.
Oh, I want to talk to that person, right?
Yeah.
And so then it makes it easy for me to go to that person and say, hey, I heard you're into acai bowls.
Yeah.
Like, where do you get yours?
Right.
And then the conversation gets going.
That's the whole thing that I'm still having. I'm struggling explaining this to people because you know events, but the benefit of these events and why you will be successful when you host one of these is the value that you add to your guests, right? Similar to me when I went to your white party that was here in Austin. That was so much fun to dress up for. The photos we got from it, I posted on my Instagram. I got tons of value from that. And my date had so much fun, and my friends had so much fun.
Just to clarify, the white party means we're all dressed in white.
Yes.
Not that only white people showed up.
Correct. It was a very diverse party, but we were all wearing white, and I had a white cowboy hat on, and it was so much fun. Similarly, with these events, we use these icebreakers to create new conversations. Because everybody should be meeting tons of new people. Like, that is the metric of success at my events. How many new people did you get a chance to speak with? And I think it's what's different. I know we're going to talk about dinner parties later. But at my cocktail parties, the goal is to have a lot of little conversations. If you like somebody, then you can schedule a coffee or a one-on-one later. But hopefully you get to meet somebody new.
Yeah, I want to get into that a little bit later because I've hosted a lot of dinner parties and big parties and small gatherings and definitely learn a lot. So I definitely want to kind of vibe with you on that. So we talked about the C, we talked about the N, we talked about icebreakers. Let's talk about the K. Kick them out.
Kick them out at the end. 2-hour party only. Something funny when I moved here, by the way. When I was in New York, all the time, 7 to 9 p.m., that was the time for the events. I started to ask people around here, hey, what's up? I'm going to do a happy hour, kind of a cocktail party. What time should it be? People are like 5 to 7. So much earlier, or like 6. I'm like, does nobody work around here? 5 to 7? What is happening? 5 o'clock, I'm getting into the flow. I can't do a party at 5. So now I host my events from 6 to 8. And I do a 2-hour event. Why are you laughing?
No, like I totally see where that's coming from, but go ahead.
Isn't that funny? In New York, like, no, you're not, you can't get out. Anyhow, here, I do the K. It's a 2-hour party. Kick them out at the end because these aren't big booze fests. These aren't a chance to go get wasted on a weeknight. You got to keep it tight. But it's also, and you as a host would know this, I end it when things are going great. When things are going so well, I'm ready to end it because I want people to come back. And for me, hosting has become a habit, and that's the like secret goal of the book is like anyone can come on a podcast like this and convince your listeners to host one event, right? Maybe I could say, you got to host a dinner party, you got to host a mastermind, or you got to host a cocktail party. Anyone can do that. But can you learn to make it a habit? Can you learn that hosting can be something that you can do frequently? Hopefully with this formula, you can. When you host a 2-hour event, it also makes it easier on you. Like, you're not up until so late, and then you go to sleep and your apartment's a mess or your house is a mess. You have, beer cans and pizza crust. Well, you won't have beer cans at my party, but it's just messy. And so that 2 hours allows you time to wind down, to clean up afterwards. It's also an easier commitment for people. When they know that there's a start and an end time, low key, they also show up on time. And that's a huge part of it. It's how many barbecues or something you've been to where it's like, okay, it starts at 4 p.m. You're like, wait, this goes to 4 till 10? Like, what time does this thing go? Nobody shows up on time then. I find that a lot of people show up on time to these parties because it's so tight.
Yeah, they feel like if they don't come on time, they kind of miss out because by the time it's 5:30, it's almost coming to an end already.
Right. Yeah.
So we got the Nick framework. So if someone wants to host their first party, you talk in the book about the party runway.
Oh, yeah.
So a common mistake that people make is, it's Tuesday, Friday rolls around, or Friday is coming up to say, hey, I want to host a party on Friday. And then in your book, you talk about you don't have enough runway to host a good party. Talk to me about that.
Well, we both, I'm not going to put this friend on blast, but we both have a mutual friend whose name rhymes with monadic gnat, who is notorious for late planning his parties. He will text on like a Wednesday for like a Thursday get up or something. He's like, hey, I'm thinking about getting people together tomorrow night. You can't do that. That doesn't line you up for success because here's why. People have a lot going on, whether it's work commitments, family, or social things. You need to give yourself a long runway to get in people's calendars. And it's one of the reasons why I suggest all my parties are hosted on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday night because they're not socially competitive nights. When you host with a long runway, that means that you give yourself at least 3 weeks of planning. Now, there's not a lot of planning that goes into it, but you give yourself at least 2.5 weeks to fill up your guest list. The reason for that is that for a new host, you don't have to worry about this, but for a new host, what do you think their number one fear is?
That nobody shows up.
That nobody shows up. The new host, that's the number one thing they're worried. Nobody's going to show up, or worse, only a couple people will show up, and it'll be really awkward, right? And so we give ourselves the gift of a long runway so that we guarantee we can fill up the whole guest list and have full confidence going into the party that we're going to have everybody there. Now, there's other things that I do to guarantee as well, that you don't send out the invitations until you have at least 5 yeses from your core group. When you get 5 yeses, then your party's on. Then you can invite some other people. But you don't do anything until you get those 5 yeses to your date and time.
So how many people do you aim for to have at a cocktail party?
I think 15. For a new host, 15 is the number. For a slightly advanced host, 15 to 20. For someone who hosts events, maybe 25, but probably the 20 number. But what I say in the book is, for a first-time host, the number that you're shooting for is 15. And that goes back to the idea that the more people, the less work that you have to do within reason. Right at the about 10 or 12 number, there's not enough collisions happening, I guess. I don't know the number of what it's called. Like, this person can talk to this, and this person can talk to this. At 10 or 12, it doesn't really get to that for these light, short conversations. But at 15, that really feels like a lot of people.
So if I understand the method correctly, you first invite 5 people, your core group. Yeah. So your core group are probably like your best friends, people you see all the time that are going to say yes regardless of what you do.
Yeah.
So you invite them first, and you want to get up to 5 people to confirm.
Yeah.
And then you start inviting others.
Yes.
Why do it that way?
You want those 5 people that are going to say yes, that are going to make you look good, that'll laugh at your jokes, that'll give you a sense of confidence. That you know that even if nobody else shows up, these 5 of my friends are coming, and it's not going to be a bad event, right? Like, I'll have those 5 friends, even if nobody else comes. There's also the element of social proof, that when you create the event page, all those 5 people are going to have said yes, and their names will be on the page. Has this ever happened to you? I guess now not as much because we don't use Facebook events as much, but you'd get invited to a Facebook event and it would be like 2 people coming, 3 people maybe, 117 people invited. Nobody's signed up. Nobody's like said that they're going to come to the party, but you can tell that the host just blasted invites to everybody with very little thought. So I think that giving you the confidence of having that core group allows you to reach out to that neighbor who maybe you've never met before and say, hey, some friends and I are hanging out. Would you like to come over? In 2 weeks, we're going to have a cocktail party. And that allows you to authentically say, hey, some friends and I are hosting a party, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the big benefits I've seen from hosting is when you meet somebody, if you already do this kind of like, let's just say once a month, which I think you recommend in the book, right? 4 to 6 weeks, every 4 to 6 weeks. So if you have something going on, then anytime you meet somebody, you can say, hey, love this conversation. I host cocktail parties. You should come sometime.
Yes.
And now you have a built-in excuse to follow up.
It's insane, and you and I are smiling about it because we know that it is a secret weapon for building your social life. When you always have your next event on the calendar, it's an easy next step to, exactly like you said, continue the conversation and potentially build the relationship. It's an absolute life hack.
Yeah, because if you don't have that, what happens is, let's say I just met you. You're like, Nick, oh, you're cool. You did museum hacks. You're hosting events. Oh, that's awesome. We should definitely stay in touch. We exchange numbers. What do we text about?
Right.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
What are you up to?
Yeah.
Doesn't go anywhere.
No, there's no next step. The next step is for us to get coffee or to do dinner, and that is a big lift. And yes, it happens. Your listeners are probably like, well, I've met somebody for coffee, but does it happen to you like multiple times a week? No, I would be willing to bet that most people are only doing those types of interactions maybe once a month, maybe once a quarter. When you're always having your next event on your calendar, you'll be shocked. It's not, I hate to say at how you start to collect people, but how you bring people into your orbit and into your world. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's a big ask, but also there's this negative momentum kind of when they say no to your request to have coffee or dinner.
Yeah.
Because then you're less likely to ask again.
Right.
Because it's such a big commitment.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like, oh, I don't want to bother this person or this person's probably busy. So I want to ask you about kind of like the psychology of hosting events because I think there is a lot of fear, a lot of rejection that is kind of part of hosting, meaning you invite somebody, they don't show up. You invite somebody, they say no. Like, what would you tell like a new host to deal with these sort of things?
One small hack is that the phrasing of how you invite somebody to get their details, there's a subtle but important difference between my friends and I are hosting an event, do you want to come? And my friends and I are hosting an event, can I send you the information? Very big difference in that it's almost impossible to say no to the second one. Can I send you the information? Yeah, of course. I'm not saying yes or no, but yeah, you can send me the information. Here's my details. Versus, yeah, it could be a lot. My friends and I are hosting a cocktail bar. Do you want to come? For a stranger that you've just met, do you want to come? That's pinning them down right there. So I advise people when you're meeting new people and you're inviting them, your ask is just, can I send you the information? And then they'll see the event and how much time and thought you've put into it, and they'll probably come. About the idea of getting rejected, I have hosted hundreds of events and invited probably thousands of people to my events. I still get rejections to this day. Does it mean that they don't like me? Maybe. Does it mean that they're probably busy? Yes. Right? People have a lot of stuff going on. They have work things. They have personal responsibilities. I never take it personally, but I'll invite them to my next event. I'll usually follow up their no with, can I invite you to the next party? I've never received somebody saying, no, stop inviting me. And why is that? Because an invitation is a gift that you give to somebody. Everybody likes to be invited. They like to be feeling like they're wanted. Like even the most attractive man or woman in this city will take it as a compliment that you want to invite them to your next party. I think it's a powerful mindset to think about. When you host a party, you get to give the gift of an invitation.
So peeling behind the scene a little bit too, when it comes to inviting, do you just invite everybody? Do you invite people that you recently met? Like, what would you tell a first-time host who to invite?
For a first-time host, here's the important thing, because your listeners are overachievers, and they may be trying to reach to people that I've been wanting to get in touch with this person. I'm hosting an event. Now's the perfect opportunity. That's not the best thing to do. My suggestion for a first-time host is use this first party as a low-stakes affair. You should be inviting people that you're not trying to impress right off the bat, because you'll be doing new things as a host. You'll be doing name tags. You'll be doing rounds of icebreakers. And I don't want you to do that in a situation where you're nervous or uncomfortable more than you have to be. So for a first-time host, it's often just the more the merrier, and don't try to curate the group. Yes, you can curate later. That's a very advanced host move, and it will help you grow your network when you start to curate. But at the beginning, you simply want to learn for the first party the fundamentals of how easy hosting can be, and it's important to do that in a low-stakes environment.
Okay, so be careful about going for the big fish when you first host, because we don't want that additional stress when we're hosting, because hosting itself can be already stressful.
Yeah.
So do you have fun at your own parties?
I feel it's a good question, and I don't know what to say, but I'll just be honest. Fun for me is, maybe playing tennis, or like going snorkeling or swimming, or like some physical thing. I can't say that I have a lot of fun at my parties. Not to say I don't enjoy them. I love them. But I'm wound up afterwards. I'm like on, right? And I don't think of my own parties as a place to have fun, right? I'm kind of I hope this doesn't like ruin this whole podcast for somebody listening, but I'm working in a way to add value to everybody at the party. And I'm focused on adding the most amount of value, not on my own fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the reason I ask is, having hosted a lot of events too, is when you get into it, you think it's going to be fun for you too, which I think in the beginning it is. But the more advanced you get, the more less fun it becomes, I guess, because you're trying to facilitate, right, and be a good host. And being a good host requires a little bit of focus, a little bit of attention, right? And especially me, I'm the type of person that if I'm hosting, I want to make sure every single person has a good time. So I will try to talk to every single person, make sure they're having a good time. If someone is not smiling or someone's standing alone in the corner, I'm like if I'm mid conversation with someone, it's like, hey, let me get back to you. I want to talk to that person, right? And so it kind of takes the fun a little bit out of it, but I get the satisfaction of knowing that people had a great time and all the ancillary benefits from hosting that I find very quote unquote fun or satisfying. But the event hosting itself can be very stressful.
I want people to think about the times in their life, and I've never done this before, but I just want to think and just play this game with me. Think about the times in your life when you've made the most money or added the most value or made the most jumps in your career. Would you associate that with having fun? I would even challenge baseball players or sports players that a sport that we would think is fun, right? I don't think that if you ask somebody at the top of their game, truly at the top, when they're in the most competitive in the zone, are they having fun? I don't know if they would say fun is the word. Do I feel focused? Do I feel satisfied? Do I feel prouder than ever when my events are done? Yes. But is fun the word? For me, no, it's not a fun thing. I don't want to turn people away from saying this, so I hesitate to tell you the real, raw truth, but that's the real.
Well, I think a lot of people can relate to that, because if you've ever hosted your own birthday party, I think people can relate in the sense that it can be very stressful of inviting people, or even your wedding. Your wedding is even a better example.
Everybody talks about that.
If you've been married, you hosted a wedding, on the outside, it looks like the best day of your life,
Right.
and great pictures, and everyone had a good time. But you ask every single person that ever hosted their own wedding, go, oh my gosh, like it was stressful. This went wrong, that went wrong, right? But it was still the best day of my life.
Right.
That's how being a good host and hosting your own events is kind of like that too.
Yeah. I've never thought about it like that. The wedding comparison is good. Now, I think I've made a formula that allows people to have the least amount of stress so that they feel the next day that they're willing and they want to do it again. But I don't know if I would say fun is the word. It's a different type of satisfaction.
Yeah, there's a lot of ancillary benefits that come out of it that makes you, I think, want to do it again. Like when you hear that feedback of like, hey, Nick, that was such a great event. Like, thank you so much. You go, oh, yeah. See, that was worth it.
That's
what I mean?
huge. That's huge. I worked with a woman whose name is Tatiana in Seattle. She just read my book and hosted her first party. And she texted me at midnight. She said, I've been getting text messages from everybody after the party telling me that it was the most fun that they'd ever had. It was the best party that they'd been to. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, all she did was just like name tags and icebreakers. Why? But what it was is it's meeting all these new people. That's what people really appreciate.
I think one big life philosophy I have when it comes to this is, so one of the reasons I started hosting was I read this book called 30 Lessons for Living, and the author interviewed people who were about to die, and he asked them, like, what's one life lesson you'd like to pass on to the next generation? So there's stuff in there like, don't work so much, make sure you have a best friend when you're older, because oftentimes people don't have one when they're older. But a big theme of the book is that our happiness comes from our relationships with people. And if you look at people who live the longest, oftentimes they have great social relationships with people, whether it's their siblings, significant other, their parents. And it kind of made me realize that I had a lot of shallow relationships. There's a lot of like, oh, I know Nick by name, but I actually don't know him as a person. And that kind of inspired me to start hosting and actually spend more quality time with people. And I'm curious, what is that motivator for you nowadays? Now that you've done so many events, like you kind of seen the compliments coming in, I'm sure, like what keeps you going?
In doing this book, for me, my goal was to get 500 people to read it and to host a party using my methods. I haven't figured out how I'm going to make money from it or if I'm going to do a business out of it or anything. Similar to museum tours where I said I'm going to work for a year or two and do them for fun, for free, for friends, and become the best possible tour guide. Similarly, now I'm obsessed with that idea of trying to get 500 people. So not 500 sales, not 500 reviews, but 500 people to host a party. And that's my that's my second mountain of sorts.
So when it comes to a first-time host, I'm sure a question that comes up is, how much does it cost to host a cocktail party?
I think you can do this party based on the shopping list that I've made, which you can find on my website, and download a free 2-page party checklist. It works out to about $100. That includes some alcohol, some mixers, a lot of seltzer water, because everybody drinks sparkling water now, and some very basic snacks. Chips, guacamole, some salsa. But that's it. A lot of people spend the most amount of money for parties on decorations and fancy appetizers that really doesn't matter.
So the food doesn't matter at all, is what you're saying?
I feel like not as much as people think. Not as much as people think. People are really coming for the people. And that's a little bit of why I host the parties at the times that I do, to allow specific time for people to eat before or afterwards. I think with a 3-hour party, you've kind of got to do dinner. But with a 2-hour event, it's pretty clear, there won't be food served. And I say that on the invitations too.
Okay, so let's go into kind of the third part of the podcast, if we may call it host to host.
Yeah.
If we may just call it informally here.
Great.
So why cocktail parties over dinner parties over one-on-one? You kind of talked about that part a little bit, but I'm sure you've experimented with dinner parties as well.
Yeah.
Right. So why do you like a cocktail party over a dinner party?
So I've hosted dozens of dinner parties, and I found that I could get 80% of the benefits with 20% of the work. I could also reach a lot more people with my cocktail parties. I struggled with, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts or experience, because you've probably hosted more dinners than I have. I would host dinner parties and have 6 or 7 guests. And if I would even get 1 or 2 cancellations, it would really ruin my whole plans almost of who I wanted to meet and things like that. And it would really throw me for a wrench. And I would spend all this time and have all this food and spend all this money on food and stuff. And it became a lot of work of the curation too. The time that I went into curating that list of people, hand selecting each one specifically, it really was a lot of time and effort for me. And I found that the cocktail party more easily allowed me to widen my scope of these loose connections and weak ties. And I got a similar amount of benefit.
So I've hosted different types of events. So what's funny is when people meet me in Austin, they know me as the guy who throws like fun events. And when people meet me outside of Austin, they usually know me from Asian Efficiency.
Okay.
So it's very funny living in Austin. Most people don't know the fact that I have this big podcast and like this big audience. They know me from, I went to Tan's event and it was great.
Right.
And so what I've discovered, and it's something I talked to Tim quite a bit about because he and I do the events together most of the time. So I've hosted like 500-600 people events to, a dinner party of 10 to obviously a one-on-one or like a small group setting, right? And everything in between, right? And I think every sort of event type, if you may call it, has like different benefits and different pros and cons, right? So I think when I look at your cocktail party, I think because it's low commitments, right? It's easy to invite people and to bring people there. And if you're trying to say cap it at anywhere between 15 and 30, you can kind of like manage it and run the show. But if you throw like a 400 person party, the hosting aspect is a little different, right? Because then there's less intimacy and less like one-on-one time. And so I find even with the 15 to 30, there's not enough one-on-one time to really build a connection with someone. And that's where I think the dinner party is so helpful because when I host a dinner party, it's me, Tim, and 8 other people. So it's 10 people total. And we've done like 44 in 2 years or so. And we've never had an empty seat.
That's how? How did you do that?
So there's a combination of different things. One is, like you talk about in your book, you send reminder emails or text, right?
Yeah.
Super important. Always do that. One thing I like about your book that I want to start incorporating is giving the guest bios ahead of time, right? Yeah. So can you explain that real quick?
The guest bios are a brief who's who of who's attending, but you're not trying to only focus on the rich or successful. It can simply be people's hobbies. And you're giving your guests a light touch point or conversational resources on who else is going to be there. So you might say what somebody does for work and what they like to do for fun, or just little things that you know about them. Maybe you don't know exactly somebody coming, but you can find their LinkedIn profile. You can just pull out little bio details from that.
Yeah, I like that idea because it kind of makes you go, I want to meet that person. So it kind of gives you like an extra nudge to come. Yeah.
Wait, but how did you have no cancellation? How did you never have an empty seat?
I've even had a situation where someone had a car accident. Like most of our dinner started at 6. Someone had a car accident at 5:20, and I still filled that seat.
That's amazing.
So the way we do it is, we do all the reminders, and that gives you an opportunity to catch early on if someone can't come anymore. And then the day of. But what we also do is, and this is the cool part, every dinner we've had, we've never had a repeat, meaning everyone that sat down was always a new person that we've never had dinner with. Yeah. So what we do is, the cocktail hour starts at 6. So we invite people that we're going to have dinner with to come. And then we're going to invite people who've never been to one of our dinners, but want to come to the cocktail hour. So it's the first hour. And so it's from 6 to 7. And then, so there's people who will be sitting at dinner and there's people who will come to your future dinner. Right. So they can all mingle and meet people, and it's very curated too. So if someone does cancel in the last minute, we have like a pool of people who want to come to your future dinner. And if someone cancels, we'll just go to one of them and say, hey, are you available tonight? Genius. Like last minute impromptu. And most of the time we have somebody they'll say, yeah, I'm happy to stay.
Genius.
So that's how we always had a full house.
Nice.
And so what I find with the dinner parties, because it's so one of my biggest pet peeves of dinner parties is if you have a table of 10 people, the typical rule is, which I'm sure you've seen, is like 7 or 8, because it's kind of like the pizza rule. You want to be able to share 2 pizzas or 1 pizza with the whole team. As soon as you can't do that, it gets too big and you have side conversations. So my biggest pet peeve, and something I told Tim too, was if I sit in one corner and you sit on the other corner, I never get to meet you. I only talk to the people that are sitting in my corner, right? So the way we solved that problem as we were doing our research was there's this thing called a Jeffersonian dinner party. Have you heard of that?
Single track conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's only one conversation going on the whole time. And so in order to make that work, and man, you have to come to one of our dinner parties when we do them. Yeah, I think you would be blown away, honestly.
I'd love to.
And the idea is this: we have one conversation going on the whole time. So Tim and I are like the MCs of the night. And so we kind of control the flow, right? So we open up the dinner party and there's like a structure to it. It's very planned and very structured. But when you're a guest, you would actually not see the structure. You actually have no clue that it is very structured. But because we've done it so many times, it feels very natural and organic. So the benefit from the dinner party, I find, is because you sit there for 4 hours together and there's a flow to it, you really get to know the person. Instead of one-on-one, I can get the same effects in that setting, knowing everybody, and everybody knows each other as well. So by the end of the night, you've met like 9 new people, like 9 new friends. And that, I think, is extremely powerful. Plus, if you pay for the dinner and stuff, like, it's very generous. Like, there's this exchange of value and relationship that I find is so different and more impactful than a cocktail party.
Yeah. How would you split the duties for the Jefferson? Can you explain what the concept of the Jeffersonian dinner? It's one conversation. Would you do it as a topic and say, hey, tonight we're going to talk about nuclear energy?
Oh, no. It wouldn't go like that. So Tim and I are the hosts and the MCs. And so one thing that's different is we will do the introductions.
Nice.
So Tim will do a half and then I would do a half, and I will actually memorize the introduction. So one thing we've learned is people are terrible bragging about themselves.
They really are.
Right? And then we have some people who are too good at it where they take too much time.
Yeah.
So we control the flow by doing the introductions, and we really try to highlight everybody at the table, like their accomplishments, but also their fun facts, right? So we have everybody do an intake form. So we know ahead of time, like their food allergies and stuff, but also like, unique things about them, right? So I will do the introductions. So everybody at the table will know right away who's who and who's, doing what and what they're interested in. So there's this instant connection. And then in order to kind of like kick it off, we would just ask somebody, like I would say, hey, Nick, you just moved from New York City to Austin. Tell me about your experience. What was it like moving to a new city? So then I give everybody a chance to share a story about themselves. So I'm like orchestrating it where I'm like, okay, thank you, Nick, for sharing that. Tanya, I saw you were nodding your head when he talked about, but what's coming up for you? So it's a very organic conversation, but everyone's listening.
Well, it puts a lot of hosting skills on you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It took a lot of skills and refinement over time to get good at that.
You're being incredibly tuned in to everybody's, body language or reactions. They're nodding. You're playing the room to an extent of pulling out from people.
Yeah, so that's definitely not a first-time host move, right? So I agree with you in the sense that, like, hosting a dinner party is probably not the good first party that you should do. Like, the cocktail thing is much easier, and you get, like, most of the benefits, too. Yeah. But I find that if you sometimes want to get those, like, let's just call them, like, high-level people, having a dinner party is actually a good reason for them to go out. Because oftentimes they have a partner or a spouse that maybe don't want to come to a cocktail party, but they'll come to a dinner party. So it's for them, it's almost like a date night for them.
So you would allow people to bring a spouse or significant other?
Oh yeah, 100%. Because that's the only way oftentimes they will go.
Right.
is because if they can bring their spouse.
Interesting. So for them, it serves as a fun date night. It's like something exciting for them to go to.
Yeah, exactly. So in another podcast I listened to when you were talking, you talked about how the secret to all of this is doing them on a regular basis, right? What we just talked about, doing them every 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So over time, you kind of built this reputation of like, oh, Nick's events are great events. Like you have to go to them, right? And so by us doing this dinner party on a regular basis, we had like a wait list of, I don't know, 130 people or something at one point, because we only have 8 seats every dinner. And so people kind of hear about it. And so when you tell people, hey, I'm hosting this dinner party, you should come. And if they've heard of it, they're more even inclined to come then, especially if they have a spouse that they want to bring. That's nice. So I think there's something special about including the spouse in this relationship building that you do together that is very unique.
And the person will appreciate it so much more if you're able to bring them into it and their spouse. That's huge. I never thought about that for some people, because I often hesitate to let somebody bring a +1, because at a cocktail party, they will anchor to that person and they will generally be less social meeting new people because they are babysitting or they feel more comfortable in talking to this one person. And so when I am tightly curating my larger events, I will be very careful in allowing somebody to bring a significant other, because the purpose is to meet new people, because I really want to mix up the room.
I agree with that, but I also would offer a different perspective. And that is, couples want to meet other couples.
Yes.
And so if they bring their significant other, it's a way for them to meet other couples, right? But it's challenging in the sense that if you're bringing a mixed bag of people, then they don't know if this is for them, right? Or if it's all single people, then the people in relationships can still find interesting people, but if they want to go out, it would still have to be a one-on-one, and it's not like a couple thing. Like most couples kind of want to do stuff together and meet other couples, right?
Yes. And I want to be clear, because I've said this to people. This used to be in my book where I said, don't let somebody bring their significant other. Married people think that is shady. If you were invited to an event and you're like, no, you can't bring it. Like, that's creepy and that's weird. And so I don't do that anymore. And it's only at more business focused stuff or when it's, so now I'm like very, very pro couple, but for highly curated events, I do still feel torn about that. Yeah.
I remember talking to a friend about this. He's now married, and he was talking to his group of friends, and he said, oh yeah, I went on this solo trip for 2 days to do some thinking for his business, right? Everybody was like, yo, is everything okay? Like, did something happen between you and your wife? Everyone was like immediately concerned, as if people can't go out do stuff on their own ever again.
Right.
I was just like mind blown that people think about this.
That's so funny.
So, okay, so no couples generally for you. What are some other...
No, I still say couples are okay, but I do want to host these events where people mingle and they really talk to a lot of people. I think about it the same with kids, right? Because a lot of your listeners might have kids and they're like, how does this formula work with kids? Okay, this is great for 2 single guys, but how does it work for people with kids? What I have found is that you have to hire a babysitter. For all the people that I've known that have hosted with kids, what they do is they hire a babysitter and they throw a simultaneous kid party in another room of the house that allows the parents to bring their own kids so they don't have to deal with childcare. And it can then allow the parents to talk as adults separate from the kids. Many times I find adults use these children as a conversational crutch, and they'll only default to talk about the kids and what school, this, that, or the other. And when you can still include the kids, I want to acknowledge them, and they're a huge part of your life. But we want to give adults that time to socialize a little bit. And a way to do that, if you're a host with kids and your friends have kids, is to hire one or more babysitters and throw this kid party that's in your house and let people know that you have childcare for the night.
Have you ever been asked to host events or parties just for couples?
I'm now thinking that could be a cool idea because, like you said, couples love to meet other couples. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, I think That's the one thing I hear, especially here in Austin, is couples have a hard time meeting other couples.
Yeah.
And so they like going to the bigger events that Tim and I do because they can meet other couples, and we encourage other couples as well to come.
Yeah.
Like we even put it out in the emails and the marketing and stuff of like, hey, come meet another couple at this event. Right? And a lot of couples have done that. Nice. But I've also been asked, and that's why I asked you, like, have you ever done a couples event? Like I've been asked that many times, but as someone who's single right now, it doesn't feel that appealing to me, right? But I'm pretty sure when I have a steady girlfriend again, it'd be like, oh, yeah, that would totally make sense.
Right? It also helps as new people are thinking about, oh my God, what 15 people am I going to invite? How am I going to get 15 people? Well, now you only need 7 people because they're each, if you invite 7 people and they each bring a significant other, now you have 14 plus you, that's 15. It makes it a lot more accessible when you do include the couples. So I don't want to say that I'm anti-couple. This is not a swingers party. It's not the 2-hour swingers party. Oh, no.
That's funny. What about some events that maybe didn't go so well? What are some horror stories that you've had?
I have some early stories of when I was hosting. You know, there's things like waiting to the last minute to clean my apartment. And I have a party that's starting at 7, and I've been cleaning my apartment all day and decorating all these things that don't matter. And now it's 6:45, and I'm sweaty, and I'm wearing gym clothes, and I figure I'm just going to shower real quick, and I have plenty of time because my party starts at 7. And I neglected to think that anyone would show up early, because why would anybody show up early? And I have that one story where I'm literally in the shower. It's like 6:50, and my doorbell rings. You know, I get a knock on the door, and it's my friend Nora, and she had arrived early because she just showed up early, you know, like the trains or whatever. And I run out of the shower. I'm basically naked, dripping wet, answering the door, looking like the least prepared host ever. For me, that was an example of a failure situation. I also had a woman show up to a party, and I didn't know a lot about her, and it was during like the awkward zone. That's the beginning of the party when there's not enough people there, and it's just frankly sort of awkward. And what I knew about her was that she was Mormon, right? And I was frazzled. I was in a rush, and I bring her to the group. Let's say her name was Katie. And I was like, hey, everybody, this is Katie. She's a Mormon. And it, you know, just kind of killed the energy a little bit because the polite rule, at least in American conversation, is you don't talk about politics or religion. And this is kind of what I led with for her introduction. I've made a lot of mistakes like that of maybe saying the wrong thing or not having my timing worked out very well. And then I've also failed to plan. So I've tried to set up a party the night before and only 2 or 3 people showed up. It's actually worse if only 2 or 3 show up than nobody. Because if nobody shows up, you're like, woo, okay. But if 2 or 3, it was an awkward night.
So to flip that around, what are some of your favorite parties?
Some of my favorite parties?
Yeah.
I had a party where I invited like 2 other people, maybe similar to you, who were hosts that had a healthy network, to all invite people. And we thought that we were going to have about 25 people at the party. And I had a tiny apartment in New York City. And so we had 25 people. Well, it happened that night, something happened with the weather that it caused a lot of other events to cancel. And everybody last minute, oh my God, can I bring my friend? Can I bring my friend? Can we come to this? Because my party was the only thing that was going on. And it turned out we had 40 people in a tiny apartment. And I actually had a clothes rack that was collapsible and all these jackets. It literally crashed under the weight. There were too many jackets. My coat rack has collapsed. There's coats, huge New York winter coats everywhere. People are like digging through this enormous, maybe imagine 40 enormous winter coats. People have bags and backpacks. It's not like it was a disaster or a favorite party, but that was certainly one of the ones where I'm like, this is my home. I'm going to bed here in an hour, and my bed is covered in 10 feet of winter jackets. That was a good one.
I saw that you also hosted like a dinosaur party.
Yes, yeah.
Unfortunately, I missed your 40th birthday party where you rented out like a whole water park. Like,
that was fun.
Tell me about that.
For my 40th birthday, I rented out America's largest indoor water park, which is up in Round Rock up here in Texas. And I rented out the water park for just to go slide with my friends. It was a lot of fun. And for me, that was a fun day. That was a fun party because I got to do what I wanted to do. I was sore for like the next 48 hours though.
So what happened there? Like, what's
at the water
set?
park, I got all my friends to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning to go ride water slides on a work day. It was like a Wednesday morning. And we just rode water slides all day long. We did the tube rides. We did the surf simulation wave. There was a big wave pool, which in hindsight, I had to pay like $600 extra for the wave pool. Nobody really used it. Don't do the wave pool. If you're going to rent a water park, you don't have to do the wave pool.
I think one thing I've learned from hosting is that at its core, us adults want to be like kids again. Like these icebreakers, the water park,
right.
the dinosaurs.
Right.
Like we just want to be kids again.
Those summer camp feelings, some people have said that is kind of what my parties feel like a summer camp, because I do lead it with a strong but fun and playful leadership, right? Being a leader of your own event, I think, is important.
Well, Nick, this was such an amazing episode and podcast. I'm sure I learned a lot. I'm sure listeners learned a lot as well. So if people want to find more about your book, your website, what other resources you have, like where should they go?
They should definitely subscribe to my friend's newsletter. Have you ever seen my friend's newsletter? I send it out like once a month to my friends with cool stuff that I find. And you can find that on my website at nickgray, nickgray.net. The name of my book is called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party, and it's for sale wherever books are sold on the internet. It's available on Kindle. It's going to come out on Audible around August. I'm excited about that. And you can also download a free 2-page party checklist and shopping list from my book website, which is www.party.pro. P-R-O. I'm really proud of that domain name.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link to all of that here in the show notes. Nick, thank you so much for being here, sharing all your wisdom of hosting all these parties for over a decade now and being able to condense that everything in like an hour and a half. I think it's been amazing. Thank you.
Hosting really is like a superpower, right? I think anybody can learn how to do it.